see you guys in the dark.
I met Xander shortly after I moved to Miami, Florida. Xander was a tall, lean, handsome Filipino who spoke fluent English. After meeting him, I had never been attracted to a darker-skinned man. Being an 18-year-old Caucasian female, I had only been in one serious relationship before that point. Xander was 6 feet tall, weighed about 185 pounds. He had short, dark hair that was well manicured like his facial hair. His eyes were the deepest blue, and his smile had immediately captivated me as I fumbled with my gas cap at a gas station just outside of Miami. I was the kind of girl who hadn't yet learned how to change a tire on my car, should it have gone flat. So when Xander approached me with an inviting smile and friendly gesture of helping me with the gas cap, I had immediately been taken back by his charm and thoughtfulness. Turns out the gas cap was lodged on wrong, and I was too weak to unscrew it myself. He handed it to me with another warm smile and put out his hand, introducing himself. I blushed right away, and aside from his good looks, I didn't really know why I was reacting like this. Men didn't usually have that kind of effect on me. I was a head cheerleader in my senior year of high school, and when I had met Xander, I was competing for Miss Miami Bikini. As a 5'9" brunette, I am used to getting plenty of attention from men, way more than I care for, but I didn't mind his attention at all. Xander carried himself with a completely different aura that I had never experienced. When he approached me, it was so inviting, so innocent, and so smooth. Maybe it was the exotic charm that American boys didn't seem to possess. Whatever it was, I was buying it. I shook his hand and was amused when he slyly just kept holding my hand, purposely extending the handshake while showing a mouthful of the most perfect white teeth that I have ever seen. I finally asked him where he had come from, because I hadn't seen him walk up to me until he was right there in my face. He pointed to his car, which was at the pump directly on the other side of mine. The car was a newer BMW. I didn't really care about his car, though it was nice. At this point, he was still a stranger with a nice car in Miami. He asked me where I was from as I finished pumping the gas. I told him that I was originally from Arkansas, but had recently moved to Florida with my sister. He laughed and made a sarcastic joke about how Philippine men love girls from the southern USA. This was my first indication that he was from the Philippines. I giggled and matched his sarcasm and said, "Yeah, I'm sure they're just a perfect fit." He politely asked me for my number as I turned to get in my car. I would have been shocked had he not. I told him that I usually would never give out my number to a stranger, but I was going to make him the exception. Being a complete gentleman, he held the door open for me and told me he would talk to me soon. I drove away knowing that I just met the smoothest, most confident man that I've ever seen. I wondered how long it would be to take him to text me. Surprisingly, over the next few days, he didn't text me, and I was not only shocked, but my pride had been taking a hit. Most of the time, I found myself blocking men from calling and texting me. Now I was anxiously waiting on Xander's call. 3 days later, I was just about to give up hope that he would contact me. I began to think that he was just another player who probably had too many women to juggle. But that night, around 7, he sent me a text that read, "Hey, sweet girl, you remember me? It's Xander, the guy who saved your car from certain fuel dehydration." I laughed and texted him back immediately. That officially started everything between us. Soon I was masquerading in the front seat of his BMW as his official girlfriend. We would go all over Miami. We would stay in luxury hotels, spend our nights at the South Beach, Miami Beach, and Bal Harbor. These beach visits would last deep into the night, with him always building the perfect beachside campfire. A few times we made love by the beach on a beach towel in a secluded area. My heart rate had never been thumping during sex like this before. It was the perfect dream combination. A romantic, out-of-this-world setting, and a handsome man who knew what he was doing in bed. Everybody kept telling me it was too good to be true, because I kept telling them just how insanely out of this world everything was. My parents did not approve from the start, mostly because Xander was 24, but I was of legal age, and they were back in Arkansas. I was determined to make my own decisions. The one person who was extra leery of the whole situation was my older sister, Clara. She said that I needed to slow down and get to know him better, and not just let him have everything all at once. She had never seen me so captivated and swept off my feet, and I guess this made her feel uneasy. I went from spending all my time with her to spending most of my time with Xander. This put a lot of stress on me because Clara was providing the roof over my head. Soon, though, things began to get suspicious with Xander. He had asked me to be his one and only, and I said yes. But if we were going to be going steady, at least where I came from, you don't just talk to other people. I began to wonder what his culture was like when it came to relationships. I would catch him smiling at his phone when a text came in, and when I would ask who it was, he would shrug it off and not be specific. He could tell I would get upset, but that didn't deter him from hiding it. Calls kept pouring into his phone. His phone would constantly ding with texts. I finally spoke to Clara about it, and she told me what I had already suspected, that while I had been his main side piece, I wasn't his only side piece. This is when she began to secretly follow Xander around town. I had insisted that she not do this, but she knew I was flipping crazy over this guy, and like my parents, she was very protective over me. She would stake out his apartment out at night, on the nights him and I were not together. By this time, I was becoming more and more suspicious. Xander was spending less time with me and more time with people that he called his native family. But it wasn't long before Clara came back with proof of him seeing another woman, and this completely crushed me. My 3 months of perfection was going down the tubes quick. She had recorded Xander and another girl with her cell phone as they walked up to his apartment, and he had his arm around her. It had hurt to watch the whole 45-second video, but it was all the proof that I needed. I was too pretty, too smart, and had too much dignity to be used. I had decided to break up with him in person. At this point, I didn't love him, but I had strong feelings for this man. We had spent the greater part of the last 3 months together, and I don't know about him, but the sex meant something to me, and had also factored in my feelings. I asked him to come to the house to pick up some of his belongings that he had left in my room. He knew something was not right, and had insisted that I tell him. I refused, waiting until he showed up. When he did finally make it over, I met him at the door with his duffel bag that contained some of his shirts and a pair of his sweats. He got out of the car and approached the door. I had too many emotions. I was angry at him, yet I liked him, but I was not going to cave in. "There's your stuff," I said flatly, pointing to the bag on the porch. "What is your deal, Bridget?" he asked, playing dumb. "Look, let's make this short and sweet, Xander. I can't be with you if you're going to be seeing other people. It's not fair. You told me that I was exclusively your only girl, and you had been my one and only man for the past fucking 90 days. I have proof that you've been seeing other girls." He denied it all. I had already assumed he would, so I showed him my sister's phone. I stuck the phone out in front of his face while the video played. He watched it for about 5 seconds, wide-eyed. Then he put his head down and proceeded to tell me that she was a longtime friend. I then told him that if this were true, he would have already let me know all of the women in his life that he was still involved with, at least. That at least I would have respected that. I told him that I couldn't go on with this because I could never trust him again, and that he knew I had been cheated on in the past relationships. It ended with him angrily rushing forward to grab his bag in an aggressive movement. I jumped back, thinking that he may hit me. It had shocked me to see this side of him. He turned and went back to his car where he threw the bag in the passenger seat and sped out of my driveway. I thought this would be just a simple breakup where I felt sorry for myself for a few weeks and then moved on. More damage than ever. I was wrong. By that night, he was drunk and texting me. The text started out as a guilt trip, trying to somehow solidify or justify his actions. I sent back one text, telling him that I didn't want to hear it. Then about 30 more texts came through before I went to bed. These were much darker. He explained how in his country of Southeast Asia, the men didn't just allow their women to walk away at their own leisure. This angered me, and I wrote back, "You're not in the Philippines anymore. Over here, a bitch walks when she wants to walk, and the man moves the hell on." This only made things worse. It was alarming to see this easygoing man that possessed such charm would show such a lack of dignity and self-respect and not just move on without making such a fuss about it. It soon turned into more than just a fuss, however. The next day, he came by the house. Luckily, I wasn't there, because at that point, I may have still broken down and actually talked to him. No, it wasn't until later that night did I completely lose all interest in Xander altogether. When I pulled into my sister's driveway, she was outside looking at her car on the phone with the police. And as I got out of my car, a Miami police officer pulled up to make a report. Clara's car was ravaged. The tires were slashed. The paint was keyed on both sides from front wheel to the rear, and the rear view mirrors were completely missing. They had been broken off. It was obvious who did it. I told the officer about Xander and my split and gave him our address. He told us a detective would follow up with us in just a few days. My sister was upset, and I felt so bad. She could have easily said, "I told you so," but she did not. I wanted to call him and send him texts so bad, but the officer advised me not to. The next few days went by with no contact from Xander. I promised to help my sister pay for the damage should her insurance refuse. Exactly 3 nights after her car was vandalized, things really got weird. And here is where the story gets crazy. You'll be just as shocked as I was when I finally found out exactly what was going on. I too thought it was absurd, but I knew absolutely nothing of this culture, or of the dark things that Xander was secretly involved in. That is, until things started to happen to me. The next morning, I woke up with a fever, red boils all over my body, from head to toe. My sister thought it looked like a bad case of the measles. I was so sick, she drove me up to the walk-in clinic, where the doctor on call was stumped. Measles and mumps were ruled out. By this time, the blisters had turned into boils, and were very painful. I sat there in the office, crying from the extreme pain. I was eventually sent home with painkillers. My condition worsened overnight. The next day, the boils were black, and pus would spill out of them. The painkiller meds and skin ointment were not working. My condition had drastically worsened overnight. I stood in the mirror, crying, looking at myself, my face covered up with sores. My fever was now 102. Clara insisted on driving me to a specialist, and she would pay the bill, which wound up being $300 for a dermatology visit. The dermatologist examined the sores, and like the doctor at the clinic, appeared stumped. She asked me if I had been to another country recently. Of course, I had not, and answered no. But that's when Clara chimed in and said that I had been hanging out with somebody who had recently visited the Philippines. The doctor raised an eyebrow and said the sores looked as though they had been inflicted from the inside out, like something that had crawled in and embedded myself, perhaps a type of tropical skin parasite. Clara said I wouldn't doubt if he brought some parasite along with him, and it finally made its way into your skin. The doctor asked me how long I had been seeing him, and I told her. She took a skin graft of 2 sores and prescribed more painkillers. This time, strong pain meds that would pretty much knock me out when I took them, and I had to take them often because I was in pain constantly. During this time, I had sent Xander a few texts telling him what he had given me, and maybe he would know how to treat it since the parasite had probably come from his country. The only reply he gave me was one text, and it read, "What I've given you cannot be written." Upon reading this, I was again angered. I began to hate him now, despite his very existence. I could not conceive how he could have predicted that we would split, and he would vindictively give me a skin parasite from Asia. Nothing made sense, but he had admitted inflicting this horrible skin disease onto me. The next few weeks were plagued by emergency room visits and more dermatologists. I soon ran over $70,000 in ER and specialist visits. Not a day went by where I didn't have a fever. All this was culminated by Xander driving by my house at night. Sometimes he would knock on the door, pleading to talk to me. We called the police, and he would have to be escorted off the premises. Calls and texts continued until I blocked him. He was more interested in making my life a living hell than trying to help me cure my condition. It all came to a horrifying turn when my sister began to talk to her neighbor who lives in our apartment complex directly across from her. He was a 55-year-old Filipino who had moved to the States 10 years ago. She was telling him what she and me had been going through. He had requested to see my skin lesions that had not gotten any better. When I showed him, a petrified expression washed over his face. He asked us to come inside. We sat in his apartment and listened to him. His English was good, and we were able to understand most of it. I shook from my fever as he talked. The more he talked and revealed what he suspected, the more nauseated I became. Clara told him my last few months with Xander, where he was from, and how the breakup went, and how angry and obsessed Xander had become. After hearing this, the man told of a superstition in the Philippines called the Mamba Barang, who is a diabolical sorcerer of black magic, not to be confused of voodoo. It's more of a form of black magic. He said, though, that he could not prove it. He would be willing to bet that Xander knew a Mamba Barang, and that this sorcerer had put a spell on me at Xander's request. At this admission, Clara had a panic attack. I sat there, stunned at what I was hearing. The man continued to tell us of the Mamba Barang, and how very rare they are, and they mostly stay hidden in the hills of the Philippines, and that most of them are male practitioners of the dark sorcery. Apparently, they work by casting a dark spell on the victim involving insects and bugs. Clara was now in tears. I had to be strong for her, because if I buckled now, I felt like I may lay over and die. Through tears, she asked him, but how could somebody so young like Xander know a Mamba Barang? His answer made complete sense. He told us Xander had money, assumingly. He would be able to ask the village people for a price, and the right one would lead him to a sorcerer. Then another price would be paid to the Mamba Barang. After that, a spell could be bestowed on the targeted victim. This is when my inner strength went down the toilet. Literally. I went straight for his bathroom and vomited violently. When I lifted my head from the toilet, my whole body was shaking. I was in a mild shock from hearing this, and knowing there was good reason to believe it was true. I knew that dark magic and sorcery from those countries were nothing to fool around with. Clara came in to check on me, and walked with me back into his living room. She was one step away from begging him for help. Still sobbing, she asked him what could be done to heal me. The frail, small man hesitated, looking at me with pain in his eyes. He answered slowly, "There's only 3 things that can help her: a faith healer, a Filipino herb doctor, or another Mamba Barang." Clara was beside herself as she sat on his couch and cried. I tried my best to breathe slow, deep breaths to slow my nausea. That's when I looked down at my arm, and I felt a sensation slither up on my skin below my boil. I yelled out in pain as a small black spider began to make its way out of my arm. After it crawled onto the surface of my skin, I flung it into the air the way anybody else would that was suddenly surprised to see a spider on them. Clara covered her mouth in horror. The man stayed seated, observing carefully. Another spider slithered to the surface and popped out. Clara screamed, then I screamed, and then I fainted. I woke to the sensation of insects crawling all over me and underneath my skin. I was in my own bed, the lights were out, and Clara was beside me, resting. I shot up out of bed, scratching my arm and clawing at my face. I began to scream again, but it came out as more of a loud moan. My skin was on fire, and I could not take the sight of more spiders coming out of my wounds. So I sat there and cried, clawing at my skin like a wild woman. Clara rushed past me in the dark. I could hear her close the front door. A few seconds later, it opened again, and in she came, dragging the Filipino man with her. It was 4 a.m. She flipped on the light and pointed at me. "You have to help her. She is going to die. She is suffering. I will pay you all the money I have if you can find somebody to help us." The man nodded and murmured a few incoherent words. He reluctantly sat down next to the bed beside me as I dug my eyes out with the index fingers. At this point, I could hear the insects inside me scurrying around as my skin moved with their own movement. The man said, "She has been cursed by a prayer ritual. The insects have either went in her nose or through her mouth. They need to be expelled." "How do we do it?" Clara cried. The man grabbed my hand and led me to his apartment. I couldn't open my eyes. I walked through the apartment blindly, insects crawling behind my eyeballs and through my nasal passages. I wanted to scream, but somehow refrained. My sister stopped him at the front door and said, "What are you going to do with her?" He stopped and looked back at my sister. "We're going to go kill some fucking bugs." As I sat in this man's living room, he began to pull out some old artifacts that I'd never seen before, with a necklace that was obviously from Asia. He said, "I'm a spiritual doctor, but this is very dangerous, for all of us. I am going to be going onto somebody else's territory, somebody's black magic. If they find out, they can reverse the curse, or even worse, curse all of us. This must be kept private. Can I trust you?" Clara nodded wildly. "Yes, yes. We will never say a word. We'll move out of here. Just heal her." The man put his hand over my face. He began to chant words that I could only imagine were of the Philippine language. His fingers dug into my forehead and my cheeks. His chanting got louder, and so did the buzz of the insects under my skin. I screamed bloody murder, unable to take the crawling sensation and immerse burning pain. It was as if he were performing something of spiritual exorcism. The man cried out, "You are not insects from our world. You are insects from an evil manifestation. You will leave this host." All the sores on my body simultaneously exploded. I felt the sensation of hundreds of spiders, roaches, and centipedes escape as my pores gave birth to these disgusting, terrifying insects. Spiders trickled from my nose and dropped in my lap. More roaches dug out from under my armpits and slithered down my sides. I vomited on his floor and nearly lost consciousness. Clara was screaming her head off. The man did not waver. He continued his chant. I began to notice that as fast as the bugs came out, they would evaporate into the air. They truly were a manifestation, and not actual real bugs. But the curse has caused real sores. The whole thing took an hour. When he was done, my sores had flattened out on my skin like deflated pockets of air. I felt energy come back into my body. I felt like me again. I was healed, at least for now. I sprung up from the floor and hugged Clara in an embrace that must have lasted 5 full minutes. We both cried until we couldn't cry anymore. Then I hugged the man for saving my life. Clara wrote him a check for $1,000 and thanked him with her own embrace before leaving. By the time the sun came up, Clara and I had packed all our clothes up, all our necessities, and were on the interstate by 5 a.m. We drove until we could no longer drive from sheer exhaustion, and got a hotel and rested. The next day, we drove all the way back to Arkansas, where we, to this day, remain. It's been a full 3 years since there was a black magic curse put into me. I go to weekly psychiatric meetings for counseling. I'm on anxiety drugs, and most of the time, I'm so drugged up that I don't know what day it is. But I am alive. My sores are now distant, hard to see scars. I changed my number as soon as I got back to Arkansas, and I have not heard from Xander since. He is an evil man, and I believe he will get his on Judgment Day. I hate his very soul. I will never be the same again. My life is a damaged day-to-day mess, but I'm breathing. As I sat up in bed, it's 3 a.m. I just turned on the light to my room. I watched the small spider that I swatted from my face scurry off into the crack of the wall. I get the can of Raid spray from the side of my bed and fumigate the whole room. I hate spiders. I go straight for my medicine bag as my chest begins to exhale. Here it all comes flooding back. I pop a Valium and wait for it to kick in, not taking my eyes off the hole the spider went into. Another sleepless night. If you enjoyed this video, Please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.